everybody. It was amazing talks already. I'm just going to finish the night out with snakes. But I just wanted to check who's may have a fear of snakes. Oh yeah, there's some freaks in the audience. I can see them. That's okay, because just before we start, I'm just going to introduce you to something that should help. Yes, it looks weird. It's not right. But this is a snake that they found last year, and they took it out of the ground where it usually lives, and it started making the cutest little noise. So I had to share that with you just to try and, you know. All right. Oh, we can do this. Okay, it's like... Well, how do you think it goes? Let's start with that. Who thinks they know what it will sound like? Pretty good. It's like... It's extremely cute. So just have that in your mind when there's going to be so many pictures of snakes in this. So buckle up. Sorry, guys. Hopefully by the end you'll have learned something that makes them feel like a little bit different, you know, not just thinking about how scary they are. So snakes are quite interesting because they have two penises, and I'll talk about that in the talk. It's very strange, but it makes me believe in evolution, because what God would give an animal two penises, no hands? It's just very cruel. So think about that when we think about snake. I'm looking at it. There's nothing on these slides. It's amazing. Truly beautiful. This is like a scientist's nightmare because they rely on their slides for everything. I've got a question. Do they use both penises? They do, not at the same time. They use one at a time. And the idea is that there's a refractionary period, because I think all the men in the room will know you can't. So they can mate multiple times in a row. And even without limbs, snakes have a handedness. They have a side they prefer. But we know this through their penises. Okay, what else do we know? I've got another question. This is great. The question was, do we have tandem peni, or are they separate? Brilliant question. They are sort of either side. Okay. And they're really horrible. I gotta do something. Come on. I'll just keep going. And imagine the sea snake comedian, you know. Male comedians already talk about penises. It would just be twice as much. I couldn't imagine. We've got another question. This is great. Fuck yes. Fuck yeah. These are the questions. Are snake vaginas accommodating the penis? I have a student who is fascinated by this question, and this is what she's doing her PhD on. So we will know. And it's interesting because these penises are horrendous. Some of them are okay looking, I guess, but most of them have these big spines, hooks, they're calcified, you know, and some of them are just like little, and others are like really downward pointing hooks so they can go one way and not the other way out. So we're really fascinated by what the vaginas are doing, and like, are they the same shape? Are they trying to, like a duck's vagina, trying to like do multiple folds and accommodate for those nasty spines? And yeah, I got another question. I actually took them out. I felt like it was too raw. Yeah, I did. But I have something even better, which is what the... Yeah. Come on. Thank you, Anthony. We'll get into that. There he is. Come on. That's enough. Okay. Let's get like super scientific now, but we will get on to more snake penises and more importantly, what's going on for the female snakes. Okay. But I was going to tell you a little bit about snake eyes. That's what I was going to show you. Snakes can see things. But we found that if you've got really big eyes and you're a snake, you sacrifice your brain, so you've got a proportionally tiny brain. So we now know that stupid snakes see better. So just talking about that, basic research and how important it is. We did it, guys. They can hear, but only through bones in their skull. That's what that was referring to. I can't believe how disastrously that fucked up. So they don't have an outer ear opening, so that's how you know a legless lizard from a snake, because a legless lizard will have ears, like an idiot, and a snake won't. So the lower jaw will vibrate, and that's how it hears things, and that gets to the inner ear. So I study snake sensors, that's why I'm telling you about this stuff. And something you may not know about is that snakes are actually super, super sensitive all over their face. They've got these tiny little organs, laser pointer, like little freckles, basically. And these are mechanoreceptors, which means they're touch sensations. And there's thousands of them all over their head. So keep that in your mind when we start talking a little bit more about why sea snakes are awesome, which I also study. But what about this question? Can snakes smell? Like, what is this snake doing here? Smelling. Tasting. Good answers. Wrong. It's actually doing this really weird third thing, which you can see in your cat if you have a cat, because I'm not a snake lady, I'm actually a cat lady, so that's important to do. But basically, it's going to this other organ that we don't have as humans, but cats do and mice, and it takes in the molecules from its tongue, and each tongue tine has molecules from different sides of its head. And when it retracts it back into its mouth, those molecules are going up to 2 separate organs that receive that information, totally separate. So they have this stereo smelling, sniffing ability, but it's not really sniffing. But it does pick up chemicals, and it's usually for recognizing mates, potential mates, and predators, and potential prey. And so what your cat will be doing here, because you won't have a dog, you have a cat, this is actually, they're trying to get more information up to that organ. And because it's so important in reproduction, if you look at some male snake tines, they're much, much bigger and longer than the females, because they're spending more time searching for females, usually. And I'm about to show you a picture that, if you don't like snakes, look away now. It's beautiful. So these are garter snakes from Manitoba, and they overwinter. They'll do what's called overwintering. They'll sort of go into a hibernation, and then as soon as it starts getting a bit warm, they'll all emerge, and the first thing on their mind, you know what they're going to do. It's sex. They got to find the females. So they'll use their really long tongues to track female scent and where they've gone. And they'll go even further. Some males will cloak themselves in female scent. And we're not really sure why they do this, but one hypothesis is so that other males will go and crowd onto him and warm him up with their body temperature. And he's super quick, right? And then he can go and find a female. Their penises are horrendous, by the way. They're big spines. But what about the female snakes? So do female snakes have a corresponding organ to the penis, which otherwise known as a clitoris? I know you've been thinking that. I know that's all you could think about every night when you go to bed. And you know what? Yes, they do, and we found it. We found it last year. Basic research, baby. Here's a death adder. Here's the clitoris. Can't you tell? There it is. Weirdly enough, people hadn't found it before. And so Paul's talk about misogyny and chauvinistic bias, and a lot of herpetologists are males traditionally. That's the stereotypical male. They just didn't think to look for it. And it's even in the literature, they said they don't have it. They don't have it. No. So we published this a couple years ago now, and we're really excited. But before we could get it accepted, we went to a different journal, very high impact journal, junk journal now. But the reviewer said, yeah, this isn't really a big deal. Didn't we already know this? Surely snakes have clitorises. And I was like, great, where? Point me to the clitoris. And okay. So we had to do a review before we published that to say, no one had actually thought to look. And we actually are the first ones to describe it. And the reviewers in that one said, and you can tell I'm bitter, the reviewer said, okay, you found a hemiclitoris. So it's called hemi because they're paired, right? So males have paired penises called hemipenes, and females have paired clitorises called hemiclitori. So that's cool. And one of the reviewers said, no one cares. No one's going to care about snake clitorises. And as soon as this was published, the New York Times covered it, the Atlantic covered it, all these memes, So I'm like, give the people what they want, okay? And what was funny about our review was coming up with, so they actually didn't know that lizards had clitorises, which is interesting because lizards are closely related to snakes. They're just limbed snakes. And it was discovered in the 90s. A male researcher found the hemiclitoris in a lizard. And you go to the discussion and he's astounded. He says, it's astonishing this hasn't been discovered before. And it really is. And then he goes on to speculate, like what would be the function of a clitoris? Single male researcher. Just wondering about... And he actually speculates. Good on him. He had one line that said, we really need more research into this, and we really need to understand, sex in lizards and whether the hemiclitoris is capable of stimulating the male hemipenis during sex. That was it. And he's like, I guess we'll never know. You could look at every other animal that has a clitoris. What does it use it for? So that was a brilliant example of some of the bias that we faced. Now, a quick break. We're going to move on to sea snakes. So not everyone knew about sea snakes. I certainly didn't know that they existed until I started studying them, and I did a PhD on them. So let's play a guessing game if you can guess the sea snake. Is this a sea snake? We've got a question. Yeah. Got a couple no's. No, it's a snake eel. What's a snake eel? Some things. Okay, you would have been right because it's underwater. That's like a sea snake. It has a paddle tail. It does have fin and gills, which, big oopsie, which makes it a fish, okay? So it's a fish, it's not a snake, but I love the energy. Let's guess the next one. Look at this guy. Is this a sea snake? Okay, more mixed. So why don't we think it's a sea snake? What's any... Okay. Some ideas. You're right, it's a brown snake. So it is an Australian venomous snake, just having some fun in the surf. He's allowed, but he doesn't have a paddle tail, okay? Oh, this is a good one. What's he got? He's got an eel that he caught in the water. Is this a sea snake? Not sure. I've got a few yeses. People are beginning to suspect me. It's a red-bellied black snake. It's another Australian venomous snake. Just eating an eel is a little treat. They can go in the water. It's fine. It doesn't have this paddle tail. So it is closely related to sea snakes. Oh. Is this a sea snake? Okay. Some doubters, I'll just show you this. It's eating an eel underwater. Let's see the tail. We heard that. Let's see the tail. Oh, battle tail. What do we think? Is it a sea snake? No, it's a liar and a fraud. This motherfucker. I can't tell you. The people who send me pictures of these snakes. Oh, Jenna, I was on holiday in Vanuatu and I found a sea snake. No, you fucking didn't. So now you know this is a liar and a fraud and it will be locked up. It's a sea crate, obviously. Come on. Why? Well, okay, it does have a paddle tail. I did trick you. That was my bad. But it has to come onto land to lay eggs. So pathetic. Only 8 species. Worse than turtles. Cannot abide. Not into that. Hello. Now this is a sea snake. Okay, look at this wimp up here. What an idiot. Okay, we know it's a sea snake because it gives birth to live young so it can stay in the water as long as it wants. Every other marine reptile has to come onto land to lay eggs like a wimp. They can stay in the water, okay? They can eat whatever they want. Yes, they eat eels, but they also eat cool things like pufferfish, okay? They did evolve from Australian venomous snakes, so that makes them different from sea crates. They evolved from Asian venomous snakes. Didn't you know that? Come on. And there's over 60 species, so they're super diverse. They're so great. Let's get into it. They have paddle tails. This is an X-ray scan of a paddle tail. You can see beautiful. What a beautiful snake. And then they can dive really deep because they can breathe through their skin. They have to come up for air. but mostly it allows them to dive really deep and like release all those nitrogen bubbles. And we even recorded them going up to 250 meters, which is quite deep for a little snake. They also seal their nostrils when they dive, and they can look really cute like this little guy, a dragon sea snake. Are they venomous? Yeah, they're really venomous. Don't pick these up. That's a fang there. It's little, but yeah, potent. So they use that to eat their fish prey. But how do they feel stuff underwater? So I showed you this brown snake, which is a close relative, venomous Australian snake. And here's a beaked sea snake. They've also got fantastic names, like a beaked sea snake. And if you zoom up on their scales, whoo, they're covered in these little receptors, okay? And if you look even closer, the ones in the land snake are pretty small, they're really flat, whereas in the sea snake, they're huge, and they're more rounded. So we think this is an adaptation to sense water vibrations, like so movement from any fish prey or anything that's sort of, water getting deflected off objects so that it can sort of sense like a fish lateral line system. So that makes sea snakes pretty cool. I studied that for my PhD. Of course, we have to talk about their courtship, how they have sex with these beautiful organs. Also notice the name is very good as well in these guys. Turtle-headed sea snakes, they're really sweet snakes. They're covered, the males particularly are covered in these receptors. They're huge in them. And if you look at their chin, orient you here, they've got these beautiful spines and they've got this chin that has these massive, look at these. What do you think they use those for? I reckon. Why not? Pleasure. And if you look at how they're mating underwater, the male here, he's constantly swimming after the female, and he's sort of just so persistently dabbing at her back, and then he'll do this thing called chin rubbing, back and forth. Come on. And so we call these genial knobs. It's a little dry, but we looked into the literature, so genial just means chin for snakes, and we didn't want to call them knobs, but there was a precedent. This is what some other old white guy called them, so we're like, okay, we'll call them that. Then we discovered them on the cloaca, which is like right next to the hemipenes, right next to the, where the all-purpose cloaca organ. What do you think we called those? There was a precedent for this as well. Oh, we called them anal knobs. Science, come on. So that's a beautiful touchy-feely world of sea snakes, and I'll leave you with this, which I spent a lot of my PhD on, quite a few years ago now, but it was this remarkable ability of sea snakes to sense light on their tails. So this is a snake in an aquarium, an Exmouth, just during the day, just chuck a torch on there, and this is what they'll do. They'll just move their tail out of the light. So it was first discovered in the 90s. There was divers on the Great Barrier Reef, and they found this species, the olive sea snake, nestled under a rock at night, sleeping, but their tails would always just sort of be floating around, and they'd shine their torch on them, and they'd consistently tuck them away, hundreds of times tuck them away. And we repeated that experiment, and yep, they absolutely do. It's fascinating. And what they discovered is that only the very tip of this paddle tail is actually sensitive to light. So we thought maybe there's this eye in the tail that's helping them sense light, but why might they do this? Does anyone have any ideas? Photoreceptors? That's how they do it. I never found them, but they are in there, yeah. And is it something to do with... Actually, no, but I haven't considered that. Maybe it actually is. They're sickos. But the best theory... Oh, no, you've got another one. When to wake up, I love that, because when I was testing them, I would have to wait till they were sleeping, so I'd have to come in and make sure they weren't moving, and then I'd shine it on their tail. They'd just move their tail, they wouldn't wake up, but after a few times of doing that, they're eventually like, oh, rack off, and then they would start swimming again. So I like that idea, but no one's actually tested whether sea snakes sleep, but they must. Absolutely, yeah, does it let them hide? That's the hypothesis, for sure. And I like to use my cats as an example. Like here, he's perfectly hidden. Good boy. This cat also thinks it's perfectly hidden. Wouldn't it be great to have a photoreceptor on there to make sure you're all tucked away? And we do actually catch sea snakes with bites. This is a fresh bite. We didn't do this. We caught the snake. And it had a fresh bite from a predatory fish. They get eaten by sharks all the time. So it's this remarkable adaptation. But we only found it in 3 species of sea snake, and I tested about 8. And depending where it was on the tree, that sort of meant only 10 species have evolved this. No idea why. It's just this very special species. And yeah, I spent a lot of my PhD on that. So in summary, what have we learnt today? Stupid snakes can see better. We know now snakes have 2 clitorises. Come on, do I need to say it? Now we know, okay? And they're very, very sensitive creatures. And that's it. I'd like to thank my lab for coming out and supporting me tonight. Thanks, guys, and hope.
How good was that? You know, Jenna is thinking about starting a nerd night in Adelaide, and I think that first bit, we actually planned that technological disruption just to see if you really have the chops for it.
My comedy chops. Those are the only jokes I have about snakes, but I'm sure we could expand it.
All right, do we have any questions? A few hands went up. All right, at the front here. Do you think the relationship between ocular and neurological space in snakes compares to things like dinosaurs? T-Rexes specifically.
I'm going to have to think of it. No, that's a great question. When I've looked into what else have people found, it's actually remarkable how conserved these sort of trade-offs are in neural tissue. Because evolving a brain or maintaining a brain over your lifetime it's very metabolically expensive tissue. So as soon as you invest in one thing, you've got to give somewhere else. So it may not be an eye thing for a T-Rex. I imagine they seem to have small eyes, but it could be another pathway. We found a trade-off between vision and the tongue flicking. So if you've got really big eyes, you've also not really invested in your tongue flicking. Like, you still do it, but it's not as important as the vision. And then if you've got tiny eyes like that blind snake that make the squeaks, they actually have really big, noses comparatively. Yeah, I'm not sure about the T-Rex, but they are doing a lot of interesting studies on them and comparing them to birds, which of course are their closest relatives. Yeah. Great question.
All right, one here in the second row.
Oh, such a good question. I took it out. Yeah.
So is the sea snake tail sensitive to all wavelengths of light?
Yeah, such a great question, because this idea that there's an eye in the tail, and I had a slide on that. It was full of graphs, and I was like, these guys won't get it, but you got it. So we tested it like in a preliminary way. So we shone broadly different colors, so violet and red, and then green. And what we found is, they actually are sensitive to completely different wavelengths. So they're more sensitive to the green spectrum, whereas their vision, at least in these species, are in the violet section. Yeah, so they're attuning to different wavelengths, which I guess would be another advantage, because you're seeing something your eye can't. We still don't know why. Like, why don't all sea snakes have this? Why don't sea kraits have it? Well, we know why, because they suck. I think we know that. But yeah, it's fascinating that it's evolved in just one clade. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay. Okay. One right here.
I think so. So the question is around, cats and snakes both have this system, and snakes have clearly invested a lot in it, so they've got this whole tongue flicking thing going on for interpreting chemicals. But what's fascinating is it's quite an ancient split between that organ and, say, the nose, which are doing very similar things. They're sensing chemicals, right? Very ancient split that goes back to fishes, and then sort of became elaborated as fishes moved onto land. So they're quite distinct anatomically, and we do, like in humans and also crocodiles and some turtles, it's all become degenerated. We just don't tend to use it as much, and I really don't understand why, and why would there be separate pathways when they're all sensing chemicals. So the traditional answer is one is specific for pheromones only, but it's not as clear cut as that. Like, okay, this organ in the mouth is only for pheromones, and this on the nose is only for everything else. But yeah, it's not actually as clear cut as that. There's a lot we don't understand. And I think it's because we don't have that sense. It's really hard to use that. It's more separate in snakes. And then, what do I prefer? Oh! I like to think of snakes as cats, and that kind of helps me.
All right, we've got 2 at the back here. How do you know that the female snake's clitorises are clitorises?
Great question. It was actually quite difficult to figure it out. We first found these scent glands, which take up the whole tail, and anatomical books from 100 years ago were like, female tails are nothing but scent glands. Like, there's nothing in there, don't look, it's all scent glands. And yeah, there are these massive scent glands. But then my student Megan, who's an extremely curious individual, kept sort of dissecting. And then it just sort of had this appearance of a lobe structure. And we know that the hemipenes develop in a paired manner as well. And it was medial, so it was the middle of the tail, which is where the hemipenes would come from. So that kind of tweaked it. And then we did some histology. So we looked at the cells, and it was just full of blood vessels and nerve endings. And now she's continuing that with her PhD. She's staining just the nerve endings, and they're chock full. And in some snakes, like rattlesnakes, the hemiclitoris, it looked quite small there, but as you dissect back, it actually extends up and hugs around the vagina. So there's potential for it to be stimulated during sex, or to stimulate the hemipene, I guess, maybe. But it doesn't really have it's probably more a sensory organ in that way. Yeah. So.
Yep, the other one at the back.
Great. Yes. Yeah, so I think the question was, developmentally, they start from the same place and they just go down different trajectories. So why would you just lose one trajectory is a really great question. And that was kind of our reasoning. It's like, why would you do that? And then, but when you read into some of the developmental papers, all the papers are about how does the hemipenes form? And they're like, yeah, that will eventually form a hemiclitoris, but no one had looked for it in an adult snake before. And most of the talk around it was, it's regressed. So lizards and snakes are really strange in their development if you've got a student who works on this. But if you look at their development when they're embryos, for a long, long time you can't actually tell the sexes apart because they'll have hemipenes. All the embryos will have hemipenes. And then there'll be sort of a hormonal trigger and the hemipenes will regress and form the hemiclitoris, which is totally different to how mammals would do it. It would sort of start from the same place and go into different trajectories. So there's fundamentally different things happening in that developmental pathway, but it is interesting that no one thought to take it to the next conclusion and be like, well, obviously there's got to be a hemiclitoris here and perhaps it's functional in adults. Just hadn't seemed to have thought about it.
I wonder why. It's just no idea. Yeah, okay, we've got one up here. Yep. Do all snakes have this dual sex organ thing? Yep. If not, has it been lost?
Yeah, such a good question. So yeah, all snakes and all lizards have this paired sex organs. It's quite common. And weirdly, the Tuatara has one phallus, which is weird because they're sort of sister to all the rest of the lizards and snakes. Pardon? Say again? Really long time ago from snakes and lizards, but yeah, so they've got one, and obviously most mammals have one, but monotremes, so echidnas have two going on as well. So they've tried to retrace it. I don't think we have enough extant, living things to really know exactly how it went down, but it's quite common to have a paired sex organ rather than a single, which is interesting. Or actually to have none at all, a lot of birds have none, and a lot of fishes have none.
Oh. All right, we've got one up here.
you want to cover that one?
Yeah, please.
So over evolution, things are being, initially came out of the water to give rise to all vertebrates, including us, and then things have gone back selectively. So you're asking, why have some snakes gone back? And then, well, I'll answer that first. It's a good question. There's lots of things that have gone back. So like obviously whales and dolphins used to have a terrestrial ancestor. Snakes have done it more recently, but there's also anacondas, lots of other snakes that tend to, and you even saw the brown snake, it's just hanging out in the water. Sometimes you see tiger snakes in the water. So they have a proclivity for the water. We argue about this, like, why did that first sea snake go in the water? What did that ancestor look like? This is like bread and butter for sea snake biologists. We don't know. But there's some really interesting theories around venomous snakes came out of Africa or maybe Asia. That's where they've evolved, and then they spread down to Australia. So there's some talk that they swam down and then went back onto land and evolved, death adders and tiger snakes, and then went back into the sea again. So some ancestor that gave rise to sea kraits may have swam over. And then we sort of were like, no, that's bullshit, whatever. And then we found in the genomes of snakes genes that had jumped over from aquatic organisms like echinoderms. What are those? What's the common name for them? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, so they've jumped over from really weird animals. Yeah, sea urchins. Long ago. So there's been some back and forth. So maybe acquiring new mutations in the water, maybe getting, new prey in the water. So these sea snakes take down like an angry moray eel, and they can get things out of burrows. That one I showed you can take down a puffer fish, a stonefish. Like not many animals can eat those. So maybe they just did really well. But yeah, it's a great question. We don't know. And then the follow-up question, what was that? Oh yeah. The photoreceptor evolution, is that also relatively new? No, because we see it in other aquatic elongate animals, so like lamprey and hagfish, which are really ancient, some of the first vertebrates that don't have jaws, they have photoreceptors in their tails. I think it's new in sea snakes, but it's using a convergent mechanism. So we found that it's using a photoreceptor that's expressed in the eye of all vertebrates. And so it's co-opted that from the eye to the tail for this new function, but it's always been there. And I think, though, we're not sure what the other vertebrates are doing, but need to look into it. Yeah, so a really conserved opson's called melanopsin, which is like we have in our eye, in the back of our eye, not in our photoreceptors, but in the retinal ganglion cells, which takes in ambient light for circadian rhythms. So that's what's actually being expressed in the tail of a sea snake. So that's a conserved mechanism. It's been there for a very long time, but it's relatively new in this function. So there's no real novelty in evolution. It's always just like co-opting things for a new task.
All right, I know there are more questions, but we do have to start wrapping up now. Please put your hands together for Jenna.